congratulate you, and ran a really great race. I watched the debate. I thought you were excellent, and I think we have a lot of things in common. We have some tough points to go over, and that'll be fine. We're going to also be discussing Ukraine, Russia, the war, because Mark wants it ended as quickly as I do. I think it has to end. Mark, would you like to say a few words?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm on the edge of my seat, actually. But thank you for your hospitality and above all for your leadership. You're a transformational president, focus on the economy with a relentless focus on the American worker, securing your borders, ending the scourge of fentanyl and other opioids, and securing the world. And I've been elected with my colleagues here, with the help of my colleagues here. I'm going to spread the credit to transform Canada. With a similar focus on the economy, securing our borders, again on fentanyl, much greater focus on defense and security, securing the Arctic and developing the Arctic. And the history of Canada and the U.S. is we're stronger when we work together, and there's many opportunities to work together. And I look forward to, addressing some of those issues that we have, but also finding those areas of mutual cooperation so we can move forward.
That's great. Very nice. Thank you very much. It's a very nice statement.
Well, the animosity is gone, and Trump, I don't know if he's serious or not, is implying that he supported Carney. Carney was his choice, and that his tweets helped throw the election to Carney, which is something I can't really dispute. Joining us now to talk about this is our friend Joel Pollak, Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart.com. Joel, great to see you again. A few months ago, it was unthinkable that the Liberals could win again. The Conservative Party had a 20-point lead, and that's in a multi-party system. The Conservatives had been leading for 2 full years. The only question was, how big a majority would it be? Trump started talking about a 51st state and annexing Canada, and it spooked a million boomers and seniors into voting Liberals, letting them edge out the Conservatives in the vote. What do you make of all that?
Well, I don't think that Trump is to blame for this. I think you can make that argument, but I think there are several factors that went into this. First of all, Justin Trudeau left the scene. He was clearly very unpopular. And the Canadian public appears to have decided that the Liberal Party was just fine without his leadership. So again, you're the better judge of that than I am, but I would guess that just looking historically at the fact that there really only has been one conservative prime minister in the modern era, that there's kind of almost a default preference in Canada for the Liberal Party. So if it comes up with a different leader, we have this problem in the United States as well. If you ask most voters, until recently, really until the last couple of years, where Republicans have outperformed Democrats on what we call the generic ballot, generally there are more Democrats than Republicans in the United States. No party has a majority, and there's a huge block of independents. But typically, your average American voter is more likely to say that they are Democrats. That's changed in the last year because Democrats have become so unpopular, mostly because of their woke policies. Wokeness has become unpopular, and Trump has become very popular among those who like seeing something done about wokeness. So that's changed. But generally, there is a kind of cultural preference, at least when talking to pollsters, for the center left, even though in terms of our politics, generally our policies are center right. So it's a curious balance. And I think Canada likes to be liberal, or thought of as liberal. And so when you have Trudeau removed from the scene, then maybe there's a reversion to that. There are a couple other factors as well. One is that I think Canada likes to be different from the United States. It's part of the Canadian identity, just from my experience with friends and family and so forth in Canada. So I think that the fact that Trump came out of the gate so hard, not just against Canada, but on every front, meant that Canadians understood they had to be the opposite of whatever that was. And it's noteworthy, I think, that the last conservative prime minister, Stephen Harper, was prime minister during the height of the Obama era. There were a few years where he overlapped with George W. Bush, but basically Harper was around during Obama. And I think that Obama was a radically left president. And in the same way, I think there's almost an instinct to be different from the United States. I also think that the campaign that the Conservatives ran in Canada has to be faulted for some of the things it didn't discuss, and never mind Trump for a moment, but the issue of immigration, was there, but perhaps not as strong as it ought to have been. And I have to say that just following a little bit of the aftermath of the election, the idea that the party leader would shove out a duly elected member of parliament to take up a seat again, it smacks of bad form, and it actually makes it look like he deserved to lose, at least from this distance. So I think you have to look at the campaign the Conservatives ran. I also think that Trump could have played a role. So let's get to Trump. And the theory that we have at Breitbart News is that Trump prefers a weaker Canadian leader to one who's stronger and able to push back. So I think Trump preferred a liberal leader, frankly, than one who is conservative and might have the ability to make a stronger case for the national interest, because he could point to some ideological similarities with Trump and say, we're not opposing your ideas, we're just standing up for Canada. It's easier to oppose someone who not only is from a different country and advocating for that country's interests, but who also has bad policies in a number of areas. Carney has come out of the gate, for example, talking about climate and so forth. I mean, it's so easily mockable that I think it helps Trump make his case for the United States in the trade dispute with Canada. So that's how I would look at that.
You said a few things about the Conservatives, which I disagree with, but I don't want to spend time on those. I don't think they're that important. But let me just talk about the 51st state thing for a minute. I think you may know that it came about, and Trump referred to it again today, when Trudeau came down to Mar-a-Lago to try and head off the tariffs. And Trump said, if we had even trade, that is, we no longer had a huge trade surplus with Canada, which is almost all from oil and gas, by the way, automobiles and oil and gas. That's what the trade surplus is, but it's mainly oil and gas. Trump said, what would happen if we had an even trade balance with you? And Trudeau, who isn't that policy oriented and didn't have a good answer, he sort of panicked and said, well, then Canada would cease to exist. He said something almost exactly to that effect. Here's Secretary Rubio, who was there. Take a look at this.
President Trump has talked about expanding the U.S. footprint. In a hot mic moment, Canada's Prime Minister said that absorbing Canada is a real thing. Is it a real thing?
Look, you know how that came about? President's meeting with Trudeau, and Trudeau says, well, if you even out our trade relationship, then we will cease to exist as a country. At which point the president responded very logically, and that is, well, if you can't exist without cheating in trade, then you should become a state. That was his observation.
That's how it started.
It is how it started. And I think he's told the story publicly. And that's how all this began.
And so Trudeau panicked and said that would mark the end of Canada. That's such an astonishing thing. It's false, by the way, but it shows such weakness that Trump immediately grabbed it and jabbed at it, saying 51st state, 51st state. And I think Trump, I've watched enough of his speeches, he gets an applause line or a joke that works, and he just uses it all the time. It's his go-to line. So he loved saying 51st state. It did irritate Trudeau, but the trouble is, it felt like an indecent proposal to Canadians who were happy enough with their own country. Like proposing marriage to someone who was already married. It wasn't just not on, it was taken as an affront. And that's a luxurious reason to cast a ballot. I don't like how Trump makes me feel. But I think for a million sensitive Canadians, and he repeated it again today, which I don't even know why he's doing it. Maybe to show I think of America as the great growing power, manifest destiny. I get it, but I like the banter, but a lot of Canadians, it really turned on a lot of anti-Americanism. I just don't see how having an anti-American population in Canada helps with America First. I don't know how it helps get a stronger military. I don't know how it helps get our trade barriers down. I don't get it. And I am probably the Trumpiest person in Canada. We've endorsed him in all 3 elections. We've taken a lot of punishment for being pro-Trump, and I honestly just don't get it. How is this America First?
Well, I don't think you would have had that comment had Trump's policy not been America First, because Trump doesn't see his job as electing conservatives in other countries. He really doesn't. I think he refers sometimes to the rise of populist and nationalist movements in other countries, but that's not really where his heart is. His heart is the American interest. And it's left to commentators, mostly on the right, sometimes on the left, to talk about whether the Trump phenomenon is being mirrored in other countries and so forth. But he doesn't feel any sense of obligation. And in fact, some of his best relationships have been with foreign leaders on the left. That doesn't mean he always prefers foreign leaders on the left, but he has had productive relationships with people with whom there's something to exchange or to trade, rather than people with whom there's already a lot of commonality. You'll notice there's a bit of a frosty relationship at the moment between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, for example. That has to do with some disputes over the 2020 election, but it also has to do with the fact that being close to Netanyahu allows Netanyahu to have a little bit of leverage over Trump that Trump doesn't want him to have. And Trump has pushed him away a little bit in a number of ways. First of all, Netanyahu came a few weeks ago to try to get Trump to sign on to a deal to attack Iran's nuclear sites, and Trump then announced, without really warning Netanyahu, that he was launching talks with Iran. Then, just this week, both the US and Israel attacked the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and quite forcefully so, after the Houthi attacks on the US Navy and on an Israeli airport. And right after Israel bombed and destroyed the main airport in Yemen, Trump came out and said, we're not bombing the Houthis anymore because they've agreed not to attack our ships. And that boxed Israel in to some extent. Now, Israel had already done, I think, the most significant damage. And you don't want a situation where you create a state that collapses completely, which then requires you to participate somewhat in a humanitarian or rebuilding effort. But it was a way of boxing Israel in and saying, okay, I'm not going to be pushed any further into this conflict. So I think, just to round out the thought, when it looked like Netanyahu might lose during the first Trump term, Netanyahu had to go through several elections, but there was one, the first one, where it looked like he might lose. Trump came out and said, our relationship is with the people of Israel and not with any particular government. And so I think that Trump doesn't see himself as a kind of global leader of conservatism or populism or nationalism. He cares about those principles, but he ultimately just cares about America first. And so if he believes it's in America's interest to have a liberal Canadian leader, he doesn't mind helping the liberal leader. And he doesn't mind if he riles up the Canadian electorate to put one into power. Now, we might, again, think that it's unfortunate. And I happen to like the conservative leaders' policies in a number of ways, in many ways. And you know, many conservatives in the United States were quietly rooting for the Conservative Party. At the same time, I do think that Trump believes that he can get a better deal from Canada in terms of trade if he applies this kind of pressure. Do I like it in every case? I don't. But that's, I think, what his America First policy is about. He just doesn't feel an obligation to the Conservative Party in Canada, and he wants to get the United States to a better place. And look, just one more example. When AMLO came to power, the previous president of Mexico, many people thought, oh, that's the end of Trump's effort to get Mexico to do anything about the border, because this guy is basically a socialist and Trump is a capitalist, billionaire, nationalist. Trump did very well with AMLO. It was AMLO who sent 15,000 troops to the southern Mexican border to stop the caravans of migrants from coming up to the United States. And that's because Trump threatened tariffs on Mexico. And after that, the two of them got along very well. So I think that it is possible that Trump believes that dealing with a weak liberal leader, and I do think Carney is going to be a weak leader. I think his policies are terrible, and I think the public will sour on them very quickly in Canada. I think Trump would prefer to have an unpopular and weak Canadian leader than to have somebody who is strong and able to articulate the Canadian national interest. So I hear the pain in your voice. You know, it must be very hard. And you know, I hear the same from friends in Israel who love Trump and everything he's done for Israel, and now they're getting very worried about what kind of deal Trump might do in Iran that ties Israel's hands. And so there's a lot of frustration. But I think the lesson for Israel is also the lesson for Canada, which is that you just have to be strong independently of whoever's in the White House.